She entertained the SS but smuggled children beneath the stage until it all came crashing down. Before we get into the story, drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? Paris, spring 1942. The air smelled of smoke, dust, and boots that didn't belong. There was a suffocating kind of order on the streets, tight, quiet, unnatural. Fear hung over the city like soot, not loud or frantic, but thick and ever-present. People moved silently. They spoke in clipped phrases. No one held eye contact for more than a second or two. But on the corner of Faubourg Saint-Denis, under the faded marquee of an old cabaret that still read alcove in gilded letters, life pretended it hadn't ended. Outside, velvet curtains and fake flowers. Inside, music, women, wine, and the fragile illusion of safety. Every night at 8, there was an intermission. Every night at 8:20, she took the stage. Josephine Morrow, tall, black, proud posture, eyes carrying a pain that no amount of stage makeup could ever hide. Born in Louisiana, raised in poverty, she had come to France chasing a dream, to sing. And she'd stayed, even when the world started burning down around her. Her voice wasn't just music, it was a wave. It washed over the room, silencing even the drunkest, cruelest men in uniform. But no one in that audience knew what hid behind that wave. Behind the stage, in a cramped, stifling dressing room with peeling walls and a broken chair, two children huddled behind a folding screen, a girl and a boy, 9 and 6. Miriam and Eli Cohen, Jewish kids. They'd fled with their mother, but the Gestapo had grabbed her at the train station. Josephine didn't stop to think. She simply pulled the children into the cabaret and claimed they were her niece and nephew. Since then, every night, every frightened, hungry night, they slept curled on the floor beneath dusty old theater gowns. She sang for Nazis to keep their eyes closed and whispered in Yiddish to the children, "Du bist sicher, schlaf schön." "You're safe now. Sleep easy." Her gown shimmered gold, but under it her heart pounded like a warning drum. The audience was all uniforms now, and in the front row, always alone, always watching, Hans Stirling, SS Obersturmbannführer, thin as a blade, polished to perfection, with a smile that belonged to a predator. He never clapped. He just waited for the next song. That night, without invitation, he stepped onto the stage. Josephine kept singing. Her voice never wavered. He came close, too close. His breath chilled the space between them. "You have a voice worthy of Berlin," he said. She nodded, said nothing. Not out of fear, but because any word might be mistaken for welcome. After her set, she returned to the dressing room. Miriam was shaking, cold or scared. It was hard to tell. Josephine slipped off her heels and sat beside her, wrapping the girl in her coat. Eli's nose was bleeding again, from hunger and stress. There were no bandages, no medicine, not even time, just her voice. In the corner stood Madame Lucienne, owner of the cabaret, 60-ish, gray at the temples, cigarette eternally clinging to her lips. She didn't ask questions, never asked about the children. She'd handed Josephine the key to the dressing room and said once quietly, "Keep them away from the cellar. That's where the rats are, and the snitches." Josephine knew this place was a chessboard. Each night a new game. German officers, dancers, waiters, spies, whores, everyone betting on survival. But not everyone had children in the back room. 2 nights later, René Blanchard walked in. She recognized him instantly. Lean, sharp beard, same old hat, but now with a red armband, a collaborator. Before the war, he was her best friend, maybe something like a brother, played accordion for her on cafe patios. They'd shared bread, cigarettes, and dreams. He wanted to write film scores. She wanted to sing on big stages. The dreams died. He stayed and switched on sides. Now he walked through the cabaret like it was headquarters, checking names, sniffing for threats. That night he found her backstage, took off his gloves. "You still look amazing," he said. "Better even. Hans Stirling called you a treasure." She didn't answer, didn't hug him, didn't smile. He nodded, but his eyes drifted to the edge of a scarf peeking from her bag, a scrap of paper on the floor. He didn't say anything, but she noticed. After he left, she locked the dressing room door. Twice. Her heart pounded like a jazz piano at its peak. She tucked the children under the table. Laughter and applause echoed from the hallway. Someone ordered champagne. There was a curfew outside, but in here, the cabaret pulsed on. Josephine no longer heard the music, only the ticking of the clock. Late that night, she slipped out the back door. The street was still. A patrol car passed by. In the alley, Jules Garnier waited. A resistance courier, cheap cigarette in hand. Watchful, her footsteps were quick, calculated. "There's a raid coming," he said. "They've got names. Do the kids have papers?" She shook her head. He handed her a rolled-up newspaper. Inside, forged documents, a chunk of chocolate, and a handkerchief embroidered with Madeline, Ira to Torlaira to Narpada, maybe a memory, maybe a goodbye. The next morning, a notice went up outside the cabaret. "Tonight, a special performance by Josephine Morrow. Private engagement for Officer Stirling." No one asked who arranged it. They all knew. Orders from above don't get questioned. Mornings in Paris began with a silence that held no peace. The city breathed in tension, waiting. The sharp stomp of Nazi boots increasingly drowned out the natural hush of the streets. Posters for cabaret shows still fluttered on the walls like a cruel joke, cheerful wrappers on a rotting reality. Montmartre was half empty now. The Jews were vanishing, quietly, quickly, and people had learned to stop asking questions. By daylight, Alcove looked like a puppet theater long since abandoned. The stage lamps were cold, the velvet curtains dusty and faded. But behind them, deep in the back where the audience couldn't see, life was still moving, tense, hidden, urgent. Josephine's dressing room had been transformed. The mirrors were covered with cloth. Old pillows lay scattered across the floor, layered with threadbare blankets. Against the wall stood two children's suitcases and a bundle of clothes. Miriam and Eli, Jewish children, sister and brother, 9 and 6, had been hiding here for 4 weeks now. Their mother had disappeared the day the Gestapo raided their apartment in Le Marais. Their father had been taken 2 months earlier. Josephine hadn't slept much of the night before. She sat at the edge of a worn-out chair, breaking off pieces of bread, sharing a tiny pouch of dried fruit between the three of them. These weren't acts of mercy anymore. This was defiance. "Do you know the song Schleuf, May Kind?" Miriam had whispered last night when Eli woke up crying again. And Josephine sang, softly, a blend of Yiddish and French, laced with her Louisiana accent but full of heart. She didn't know all the words, but the melody had stayed with her. Back home when she was a girl, their neighbors were Ashkenazi Jews, back when music didn't recognize borders. In the dressing room, the lullaby didn't sound like a children's song. It felt like a spell, something forbidden, something sacred. Gunshots echoed more often now. Raids had stopped being isolated events. They'd become routine. 2 days ago, an old butcher from the street over had been arrested. Word was someone from the neighborhood turned him in. That day, Madame Lucien stood in the doorway, staring into the dark behind the curtain, and said, "The real fear isn't the Germans. The real fear is the Frenchman who's learned to whisper in German." Lucien didn't come into the dressing room often. The cabaret's owner, older now, with a shaved nape and deep lines in her face, kept her movements brisk and purposeful. She brought warm clothes, a bit of food, and once a week, fresh water. She never asked questions, but her eyes said more than Josephine could handle. Eyes that understood, and understanding Josephine had learned didn't protect you. It made everything hurt more. Around noon, 2 hours before the first show, Hans Stirling walked into the cabaret. He never came during the day. Tall, surgically calm, In his perfectly pressed SS uniform, he moved like someone who owned the place. His gaze was empty, clinical. In his hands, a box tied with twine, the kind used for wine deliveries. You could hear the scrape of his boots on the floorboards before you saw him. A silent corporal trailed behind like a well-trained dog and stopped at the door. Stirling didn't knock. Lucienne met him halfway, bowed her head slightly. He barely acknowledged her. "I'd like a word with Mademoiselle Morrow." "Alone," he said in slow, deliberate French, his German accent sharp as glass. Josephine was changing. She froze mid-motion, half into a dress the color of ivory, left over from the time before she had to hide children behind her mirror. She recognized his voice instantly. Miriam tensed in the corner. Eli sniffled softly. The curtain behind the mirror trembled, not from a breeze but from fear. Stirling stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room, but not to see. He was searching for scent, traces of a hidden life, dirty clothes, vinegar, the acrid taste of fear in the air. But he said nothing. He set the box down on her makeup table. A bottle of wine peeked out, and a small tin of black caviar. "Tonight I'm hosting a private gathering. A few officers, intimate atmosphere. Just you, just us. You understand, I'm sure. You're not just a singer." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command dressed in politeness. Josephine nodded. She didn't speak. She didn't protest. Inside, something twisted. Again. Every time he came near, something broke. Not in her body, in herself. She'd taught herself not to flinch, not to show disgust, not with a glance, not with a gesture. Her voice was the only thing she still owned, and it had to be enough. Stirling lingered. His eyes slid toward the mirror. He wasn't looking at her reflection. He was listening, but all he heard was silence. "A rare voice is a gift," he said quietly, "and gifts belong to the strong." Then he left. His boots creaked like cellar doors swinging open. Later that evening, Lucienne brought fresh linens and a bundle of paper. She passed them to Josephine without a word. Tucked into the paper was a note. "Raid in the Saint-Germain district. Jules says keep the children hidden till morning. The streets are crawling with rats." Josephine tore up the note and flushed the scraps down the toilet. The paper she kept for drawing games. Tic-tac-toe, then a maze, then crooked little houses with chimneys. Miriam saw the drawings, took Josephine's hand, and whispered, "When you sing, we're not scared." It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. And trust in times like these was dangerous, like fire in dry woods. Evening crept in on the scent of cheap cologne and loud, careless laughter. The Germans were arriving. In the hallway, shoulders were slapped, glasses clinked. Josephine finished her makeup. Her eyes were calm, almost. No tears, no fear, just resolve. She leaned close to the mirror, where the children waited behind the curtain, and whispered in Yiddish, "Pretend you're air. Don't move. Don't breathe. I'll come back." Then she walked out onto the stage. Her voice that night was something else entirely. Not a performance, an exhale of everything she couldn't say. She didn't sing for Stirling, not for the drunken officers. She sang for herself, to remember who she was, to remind herself she was still alive. Stirling never looked away. He didn't smile. He waited. And Josephine understood. Tomorrow night would be worse. He was getting closer, and his interest wasn't in music, it was in control, which meant time was running out. After midnight, when the hall had gone quiet and the clinking glasses were gone, Josephine returned to the dressing room. Miriam was awake. "Did you cry?" she asked softly. Josephine shook her head. "I sang," she said. From the outside, alcove still looked the same. Mirrored walls, velvet drapes, cigarette smoke curling above crystal flutes of champagne. But the air had shifted. The mood was thicker now, like something unspoken pressing on everyone's chest. Few French patrons still came. The audience was mostly German. Wehrmacht officers, SS men, and among them, always near the stage, sat Hans Stirling, tall, cold, with those ice-blue eyes that seemed to cut straight through skin and bone. Josephine Morrow walked onto the stage like she owned it. Her silver dress hugged her like moonlight poured into fabric, and her heels echoed with deliberate rhythm on the polished floor. No one could see her trembling hands. No one could know that every note she sang, every movement, was a layer of armor. Because tonight, death wasn't a metaphor. It was sitting in the front row wearing a uniform. Behind the curtains, in a makeshift hideaway inside her dressing room, two children, Miriam and Eli Cohen, huddled beneath a blanket. It had been nearly a month. She wasn't just singing for the crowd. Her voice had become their lifeline, a diversion, a shield. Every performance was a risk, but tonight felt different. Jules Garnier, her resistance contact, had whispered a single line before she took the stage. "They're here. One of them's inside." She didn't ask who. She already knew. The Gestapo never needed introductions. They didn't knock. They didn't question. They erased. Hans Stirling leaned toward the stage, his gaze fixed on her. "Sing like you did in Berlin," he said, lips polite, tone not. "Just for me." There was no invitation in his voice, just possession. Josephine started to sing. Her voice cracked, just once, on the first note. Then it smoothed into velvet. She chose an old jazz tune, something from the time before shadows fell across Europe. But midway through the third verse, she altered the lyrics. A change only someone listening for it would notice. Where the key hides in the door, there's no children, only flame. If the light's gone, wait no more. Turn away, leave no name. A message, disguised as a bridge. If Jules heard it, he'd understand. The children had to be moved. Now, applause followed, tepid but loud enough. Stirling rose. He started toward her dressing room, but someone stepped into his path. René Blanchard. Once a street musician, her childhood friend from Marseille. Now he wore a red armband with a black V, the mark of the collaborators. He acted as a liaison between the occupiers and the occupied. His uniform fit him like a borrowed lie. He'd changed, or maybe he'd just removed the mask. Earlier that evening, under the guise of checking the cabaret's electrical wiring, René had wandered into the basement. It was empty, save for old furniture and dust. But in one corner, he spotted something small, a child's handkerchief, embroidered with the initials MC. He pocketed it, said nothing. Later, he found Josephine alone, tucked in the dim light of a supply closet behind the stage. The air between them was heavy. She didn't speak, and for a long while neither did he. Finally, he said, "I saw what I wasn't supposed to. They're getting closer." Josephine gave a faint nod. Words weren't needed. He looked at her, eyes searching, voice quieter now. "You'd die for someone else's kids?" She met his gaze, not a flicker of doubt. "Yes." He might have answered, but the door flew open. Stirling again, standing ramrod straight, hands clasped behind his back, his stare flitting between them like a blade. "The night's not over," he said flatly. "Come." When she stepped back on stage, most of the seats were empty. 24 officers remained. One stood out, a man in a gray coat, a folder clutched in his gloved hands. He didn't clap, didn't blink. Gestapo. Josephine sang again. A second song, smoother now. No tremble, no hint of fear. Her voice was crystal, unflinching. She wasn't singing for them, not for Stirling, not for the ones sipping wine and murmuring in German. She was singing for herself, and every word was a calculated step across a minefield. One mistake, and everything would collapse. She caught movement near the bar. A waiter nodded, just once. "Jules." The message was received. The children were leaving. The song ended. Polite applause. Stirling summoned her to a private corner behind the stage. He poured wine, sat close. "You could come with me," he said, with the softness of a trap. "To Berlin. The world needs a voice like yours, not these back alley shanties. You'll die here. There, you'll live." She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "I don't want to live as someone's puppet." His laugh was short, hollow. "Then you're just a doll." He stood, nodded, left. When Josephine returned to her dressing room, it was empty. The blankets were folded, the suitcase gone. No sign of children, only a smudge of mascara on the sink and the lingering scent of fear. She didn't sleep that night. The mirror in the corner barely reflected her anymore. In the morning, Jules came with news. "They made it," he said. "They're at a monastery outside the city. We'll get them out in 2 days." Then he hesitated. "Renee, he knows something. I saw him speaking to you." Josephine looked away. "He's always known," she said. "He just doesn't know who he wants to be now." Jules left, and Josephine sat alone in the quiet dressing room, lipstick tube in hand, staring at it like it belonged to someone else. Then she began to write on the mirror. "They sing while they can. I sing because I must." This was a war without borders, a stage instead of a battlefield, a voice instead of a gun, and every step in heels, just one breath from the blast. Mornings in Paris still began with the thunder of boots. Outside the cabaret alcove, German patrols clattered over cobblestones, oblivious to the way fear soaked through the damp stone walls of the old building. In the dressing room, drops of moisture trembled on the mirror's cracked film. Josephine stared at her reflection, adjusting the liner around her eyes, but somewhere in the depths of her pupils was not the stage, but a tiny shoe, tucked beneath the makeup crate. It was dusty, frayed, its laces torn. A child's. She didn't know whose. Maybe Eli's. Maybe one of the others who had already been smuggled out through Madame Lucien's network. Too many names, not enough faces, not enough time. The knock at the door was hesitant. Then came a soft click, and René stepped into the doorway. His silhouette was stiff, unnaturally upright, as if he'd spent the morning practicing how to stand inside that uniform. He didn't enter right away. His eyes swept the room, landed on the shoe. He said nothing, just stepped inside almost casually, picked it up, turned it in his fingers. Silent. Then he placed it on the makeup table like a relic, pulled a pack of Gauloises from his coat and lit one without asking, though he always had before. Josephine knew. He'd figured it out. René Blanchard, lean, wiry, once a street musician with fingerless gloves and a grin made of sunlight. Now he wore the gray-blue of the Vichy Legion, a middleman between French silence and German orders. He didn't play anymore, just carried the accordion like a costume he hadn't yet buried. It rested in its case like an empty coffin, crossless and cold. He didn't meet her eyes, just smoked, with a ghost of a smile clinging to his lips. He might have said, "So, you're a spy now, Joe?" But he didn't. He'd made his choice. She hadn't yet made hers. Or maybe she had, but refused to say it out loud. Behind the wall, German murmurs rolled like distant thunder. Stirling had come again. He no longer needed an invitation. First it was evening shows, then afternoons. Last time, he'd wandered into the dressing room claiming to be inspecting a cultural asset. Hans Stirling, Obersturmführer of the SS, had the kind of presence that pressed the air out of a room. Towering, perfect hair, not a strand out of place, a face with no lines, no softness, just pale, polished skin and eyes that matched cold steel. He was polite, dangerously so. What began as admiration for Josephine's voice turned into something darker. He said it held animal defiance and American freedom, but fascination curdled into possession. He didn't love her. He wanted to own her. He knew she'd never agree. But that didn't stop him. Today he brought a small box. Inside, a train ticket to Berlin, a contact card from the Reich's Radio Commission, and a gold bracelet engraved, "For Josephine, unsere Nachtigall." For Josephine, our nightingale. She didn't touch it, just placed it all back inside. "In the Reich, your talent would be protected," he said, voice low and level. "Here, you're a toy. There, you'd be a symbol." She gave no reply. He stepped closer, less than 2 feet between them, lifted his hand, almost touched her face, then stopped. A moment passed. Then he turned and walked out, as if nothing had happened. 2 guards waited outside. One of them glanced sideways, catching the twitch in Stirling's fingers as he ran a hand through his hair. Nervous. He knew Stirling's visits to the Black Singer had drawn whispers. The rumors had reached the command offices. One officer had even joked Stirling was taming exotic wildlife. The joke reached Abwehr Command. After that, Stirling kept himself iron rigid. He banned Josephine from singing anywhere but alcove, forbade her from speaking to other men. His obsession had become dangerous, not just for her, for him, and that made him volatile. That evening, Madame Lucienne brought Josephine a box, half a loaf of bread, 2 eggs. "Rough day," she murmured. Her face was drawn, red lipstick smeared, dark shadows beneath her eyes. She still stood tall, but her energy was draining fast. A wave of raids had swept the city over the past week. Several safe houses were betrayed, 3 couriers taken. Lucian no longer smiled. She moved like an accountant counting mines underfoot. In the cellar behind the backstage, plans were taking shape. Jules Garnier, their resistance contact, had called a secret meeting. He looked like a box of coal in human form, short, square, always smudged with soot from the theater boilers on Montmartre. He laid out a sewer map and a route list. In 4 days, a full evacuation. All the children at once. Out through the back kitchen, down the old manhole, along the collector tunnel, up through a druggist's cellar on Rue du Cygne. But it was tight. One betrayal, and the whole thing would collapse. René showed up again, this time in civilian clothes with the blue armband. He asked Lucienne about Josephine. She didn't hide her contempt. "Upstairs." His footsteps on the stairs sounded heavy, as if each one carried the weight of something he couldn't set down. He entered the dressing room without knocking. Josephine sat by the mirror, still holding the little shoe. He placed his accordion on the table, opened it. No instrument inside, a radio transmitter. He turned to her. "You still have a way out," he said. She didn't respond. "You think I just sold out, but you chose to. You just picked the losing side." She didn't flinch. "Stirling suspects you. You're too cold with him. He's not stupid." Still silence. "I can jam the signal. A day, maybe 2. But after that," he didn't finish. Just picked up the case and left. The next morning, Josephine opened an unsigned note. "Cellar. Tonight, rehearsal." The paper smelled faintly of soot. Jewels. It wasn't just a rehearsal. It was the final gathering. That day, Stirling didn't show. Headquarters had summoned him for a disciplinary hearing. Someone had hinted at inappropriate interest in a substandard individual. The Abwehr captain didn't need to say more. Stirling understood. His protection of Josephine had become a threat to his position. He made a decision: either take her with him or erase everything that tied him to her in Paris. He ordered surveillance on the cabaret's back courtyard. Downstairs, the cellar reeked of dust and burnt wax. 6 people huddled around a map. Josephine, Lucienne, Jules. 3 more from the network. A pile of bundled clothes for the children. 2 days until exfiltration. Josephine stood against the wall, arms crossed, her gaze like a knife. "If Stirling stays, he'll see everything. I'll distract him. Make the show about me." Lucien looked at her. "Are you sure?" "It's too late not to be." Outside, Paris breathed on in ignorance. Smoke and coal, narrow streets. A news vendor shouting, "Raids in Saint-Denis!" Passers-by walked by the cabaret. unaware a storm was brewing inside. In the window frame, a faint palm print, small, maybe Miriam's, maybe someone else. And on the piano in the corner, the black case was already waiting. Inside, explosives. It was time to rehearse the final number. The July heat lay over Paris like a slab of iron, pressing the air flat against the city's narrow streets. At night, the low rumble of tanks echoed over Montmartre, sometimes distant, sometimes just around the corner, rolling past Place Pigalle like a grim reminder that time was running out. Above the sign for alcove, the cabaret's flickering light wavered uncertainly, as if even it sensed this night would not end like the others. Below, in the belly of the old building, the floorboards creaked like the bones of an aging man too tired to carry any more secrets. Josephine Morrow sat in the dressing room, staring into the mirror without recognizing the woman looking back. Her makeup was flawless, armor painted on with expert hands, but her eyes were hollow, emptied out by grief and something even deeper than fear. Under the marble tile beneath her vanity, a hidden compartment, now empty. Miriam and Eli were gone, taken an hour ago through the tunnel behind the stage, the one that opened into the shell of an old laundry across the street. Jewel had led them himself, head down, never once turning back, because if he looked into Josephine's eyes, he knew he wouldn't be able to leave. Now she was alone. No children, no future, just one final performance. Pinned to her dressing room door was a chalkboard slate that read, Morrow, 9 p.m. A time, nothing more. But to Josephine, it looked like an epitaph. In the main hall, the audience was already gathering. Officers from the SS, the Abwehr, and the Gestapo. Captains, colonels, even one general. Their caps rested on the tables. Holsters hung on the backs of chairs. The air smelled of expensive tobacco and cold sweat. On stage, a Steinway Grand sat polished to a mirror shine. Only one man in the room knew what was hidden inside it, and only one woman knew when it would be time. Hans Stirling sat in the front row, as always. His gold cigarette case rested on his lap, polished and smooth. He looked relaxed, almost amused, but his right hand stroked the edge of his holster in slow, thoughtful passes. His eyes never left the stage curtain. He was waiting. Josephine walked the corridor like a woman walking the plank. Slow steps, deliberate, each footfall echoing like a countdown. She wore the dress Lucien had sewn for her, black velvet with a band of red fringe along the hem. It clung to her body, hugged her chest, and left most of her back exposed, like a scream wrapped in satin. Around her neck, a pendant made from Eli's broken button, the one he'd lost the first night he was hidden below. The guard by the curtain nodded her through. He had no idea what he was allowing onto that stage. The applause rose like a sudden storm, but there was no warmth in it, only tension. The kind that creeps in when a room full of men senses something is about to happen, but no one dares to name it. Stirling didn't clap. He stood instead, walked up to the stage, and took the microphone. Fräulein Morrow, he said, voice silky with command. It's an honor for us all. Tonight you're not just a singer, you're a symbol, art tamed by order. He extended the microphone to her. Their eyes locked. He expected gratitude. What he got was a stare carved from iron. She nodded, took the mic. No curtsy, no smile. The band sat ready behind her, but tonight they wouldn't play. Just one piano, one voice, one moment. She moved to the bench, sat down before the Steinway, hands trembling, and began to play. A simple melody at first, an old spiritual from home. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, but she didn't sing, not yet. The notes told the story for her. During the instrumental break, she leaned forward and quietly opened the lid. Inside, a single wire looped around a small pack of plastique, a trigger set to the soft resistance of the foot pedal. Not much explosive, but enough to kill everyone in the first few rows. Jules had left a note taped to the frame. When you hear your song, press the pedal. She played a few more measures, then began to sing. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was unwavering. Each word hung in the air like a thread stretched tight. The room fell completely silent. Even Stirling froze, as if afraid that breathing might snap whatever spell she was weaving. That was when René Blanchard burst into the hall. He moved fast, too fast, pushing through tables, flashing his collaborators' credentials like a shield. His face was wild, twisted with something between panic and regret. He shouted, but no one listened. Every eye in the room was locked on the woman at the piano. He climbed the side steps onto the stage, eyes finding hers. Breathless, he leaned close and whispered, "It's a trap. You'll die too." She said nothing, just looked down, toward the foot pedal. He understood, and stepped back. He couldn't stop her. He had betrayed her once. He wouldn't take her choice from her now. Stirling stood, his voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Josephine, you belong to me." She turned to him. Her voice was calm, cold, like a gravestone being read aloud. "I belong to the voice, and the voice is free." And then she pressed the pedal. The flash came like a gasp of light. The explosion followed, not with a bang, but a dull, sickening thud, like someone crushing a radio underfoot. The first rows were torn backward. Stirling hit the wall, limbs flailing. Screams erupted. Chairs overturned. Fire burst from the base of the piano. The band vanished behind the curtain. Smoke rose. Sirens began to scream somewhere far off. Josephine didn't die instantly. Her dress caught fire. She sat there, still upright at the piano, blood trickling from her mouth onto the keys. Her fingers didn't move, but her lips did. She was still singing. No sound. Just breathe. René ran to her, ripped the stage curtain from its hooks, wrapped it around her like a shroud. He held her, whispered into her hair, "I didn't want this." I didn't know how else to stop it. But she didn't see him anymore. She looked past him, into the smoke, into the silence. A shot rang out from the shadows. One of the guards. One bullet, clean, fast, hit her in the back. She fell forward onto the keys. One final chord rang out. Random, unplanned, like everything in this war. Then, nothing. Paris. Dawn. The sky above Montmartre was pale and drained of color. A sheet of dull ash stretched over a city waking from fire. A wind blew in from the east, thick with the bitter scent of smoke and ruin. Where the cabaret alcove once stood, glowing, laughing, alive, there was now only a mound of rubble, still smoldering. Charred beams jutted out like broken bones. Cracked mirrors still clinging to blackened walls reflected nothing but dust in the slow crawl of daylight. The sign that once hung above the door lay twisted in the street, its letters melted, its paint peeled like burned skin. The cabaret was gone, and yet, from deep inside the ruin, a sound. Faint at first, no more than the rasp of wood under nail, then unmistakably music, an accordion, breathless and broken, wheezing out a tune that refused to die. The melody wavered like a voice on its last breath, fragile, defiant. On the edge of the alley, where the smoke thinned and the shadows stretched long, sat René Blanchard. His face was streaked with ash, one eye swollen shut, lips cracked and bleeding. Resting in his lap, an old accordion, the very one he'd once used to accompany Josephine. Now he played alone. His fingers trembled, from cold, from pain, from memory. His uniform was torn, the Vichy armband lying beside him in the dirt, discarded or ripped away in some frantic moment. He didn't sing, didn't cry, didn't pray. He just played, because playing was the only thing left that made sense. This was his confession, his penance, his way of saying, "I remember." Hours earlier, explosion. Stirling had been among the first to die. The blast threw his body onto the stage, as if even in death he demanded an audience. Jules Garnier, hiding behind the bar, had waited for her signal, just the smallest nod, and then he triggered the second charge. Josephine never tried to escape. She never meant to. She stayed on stage, facing the dark, not the crowd, wrapped in a velvet dress torn wide by the force of the blast. When they found her, she was curled beneath a beam, like a doll left behind in the ashes. Her face was calm, the expression frozen on her lips, somewhere between a smile and a question, said she'd known all along how this would end. By morning, sunlight spilled through broken rafters and across the scorched floor. Firemen worked to drown the last flames. Madame Lucienne stood near the entrance, wrapped in a long black coat, the Red Cross armband stark against her sleeve. Her face held nothing but exhaustion. Beside her, a young French officer, face tight, voice flat. "Did you know Jews were being hidden here?" he asked. Not accusing, just checking boxes. She nodded. "Nothing more. And you helped cover it up." "I gave children a chance," she said. "That was enough." Inside, in what was left of the dressing room, the air reeked of scorched fabric and melted plastic. The wallpaper was gone, the mirror shattered. But on the wall, just above the vanity, was a palm print, pressed into soot like a signature. Beneath it, scratched into the char, "Sing while you're alive." The letters crooked, childlike. Maybe Josephine, maybe little Miriam. Miriam now sat in the attic of a bakery on Rue de Cluny. In her hands, a scrap of red fringe torn from Josephine's dress. She held it tight, as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. Beside her, Eli slept, wrapped in a blanket, oblivious to what the night had taken. They had been let out an hour before the concert, through the tunnel beneath the dressing room. Jules had smuggled them out, dressed in monastery school uniforms. Miriam didn't cry. She had no tears left. She knew Josephine hadn't made it out, and she knew why. "She promised she'd sing one last time," Miriam whispered. "For us." On the floor in front of her sat a record player. Next to it, a worn sleeve with faded handwriting. "Alcove, recording number 7. Only if we survive." She set the needle. The record crackled. Then Josephine's voice, clear, steady, full of sorrow and something else. Light. She wasn't singing for applause, not for the officers, not for the war. She was singing for the ones left behind. An old French chanson, slow and tender, more prayer than performance. Miriam closed her eyes. She could hear it again, the whisper in the dressing room, the lullaby behind the noise of boots and rifles. That voice had saved them once, and now, once again, it was saving them. In the blackened basement of the cabaret, Jules stared at the wall. He had survived the blast. The shockwave had burned his chest, right over the spot where the detonator had been clipped. But he'd lived. He was part of the death, and part of the freedom. But that didn't make it easier. "We're not heroes," he murmured into the dark. "We just couldn't stay quiet." He placed a ring on the ground. Simple, silver, with a name etched on the inside. J.M. Josephine wore it on a chain under her dress. He'd found it in the rubble, near the mic stand. Renee played until the sun began to fall. People passed by, not recognizing him. Some dropped coins, not out of pity, just out of habit. An old man with a newspaper paused, frowned at the melody, then walked on without a word. At dusk, Renee rose, left the accordion on the bench. He wouldn't play again. He was too tired to hope, and too alive to die. But he knew his name no longer meant anything. He had betrayed her once and saved her too late. He wandered to the synagogue on Rue Victor Hugo, sat on the steps, said nothing, asked for nothing, just sat. The next morning, Radio Londres broadcast a message. Today, Paris woke without a song, but her voice remains. Josephine M., the singer of the resistance. Her final aria was freedom. Paris moved on. People walked the streets, ate, feared, fell in love, and sometimes remembered. And on the wall of a shattered building, The soot and ash still held the trace of a hand. No one dared to wash it away. Sing while you're alive.